Yep, I see you down there in the comment section. I see you screaming to sell Garrett Wilson. I see you saying how overrated Chris Olave is. I'm here to put you in your place, okay? No, Drake London should not be ranked over these guys. Let's look at Garrett Wilson in depth, right? This is a wide receiver that comes into the NFL draft, checks almost every single box you'd want to see, right? I mean, he's at Ohio State. He's hyper productive in the face of top level competition, where, I mean, his final year there, yes, Harrison is a freshman, but you have JSN, you have Chris Olave, you have Marvin Harrison Jr., you have 5 round 1 NFL draft picks at the wide receiver position in this wide receiver room. Arguably the best wide receiver room college football has ever seen. And Garrett Wilson produces. Garrett Wilson produces well enough to go almost top 10 in the NFL draft, right there as a mid to high end round 1 NFL pick. Now, what does Garrett Wilson do with this? Garrett Wilson hits the ground running. He comes out as a rookie. He averages about 4.6 receptions per game. He averages 8.2 targets per game, 63 receiving yards per game, and 12.5 points per game. Now, I understand, no, he does not win you your league. Yes, I understand that maybe this is impressive, but doesn't move the needle a ton from a redraft perspective. But you can't hold that against him. Going into year 2, he ends up getting drafted as a borderline round 1 fantasy pick. Aaron Rodgers goes down week 1, and Garrett Wilson turns out to be one of the biggest busts in fantasy football. I mean, he goes from that guy that was drafted as a borderline pick to then all of a sudden, instead in year 2, while he has 168 targets, ladies and gentlemen, 168, he barely cracks 1,000 receiving yards. He only has 3 receiving touchdowns. You're not going to return value of a round 1 draft pick if you only have 3 receiving touchdowns. But is this Garrett Wilson's fault? I would argue not at all. The reason being, ladies and gentlemen, I know we all want to give the pass to Drake London, and Drake London looks great, but Garrett Wilson dealt with arguably worse quarterback play last year and the year prior. We look at 2023. You had 11 games started from Zach Wilson. You had 3 games started from Trevor Siemian. You had 2 games started from Tim Boyle. In 2022, you had 9 games from Zach Wilson. You had 4 games from Joe Flacco, 4 games from Mike White, and 1 game from Chris Streveler. I don't even remember this guy starting. I don't even know who the hell this guy is. But nonetheless, this is good for a whopping 5.9 adjusted yards per pass attempt as an overall team in 2022. And this past year in 2023, 4.9 adjusted yards per pass attempt. There are running backs that average more yards per carry than the Jets were at with adjusted yards per attempt. It's absurd. If we go through and look at quarterbacks that have fewer than 4.9 adjusted yards per pass attempt last year, which that's what the Jets did overall as a team, not a single guy. The worst QBs in the NFL, Bryce Young, 5.0, Mac Jones, 5.2, Joshua Dobbs, 5.5, Sam Howell, 5.6. None of those guys will be starters. I mean, Zach Wilson, 5.8. He won't be a starter. Ryan Tannehill, 6.0. He won't be a starter. Kenny Pickett, 6.2. He won't be a starter. Aiden O'Connell, 6.2. He won't be a starter. Joe Burrow was injured. Can't look at his numbers. Desmond Ridder, 6.5. He won't be a starter. Gardner Minshew, 6.5. He won't be a starter. And these guys were significantly better than what the Jets did overall as a team last season. The Jets had by far and away the worst quarterback play in the NFL. However, if we go through and put in what Garrett Wilson did as a second-year player from a market share perspective, from his receptions per game, targets per game, receiving yards per game, points per reception, if you're looking at his year 1 and year 2, the guys he historically comps to, according to the road of his screener since year 2000, you have Chris Olave, talk about him in a second. Amon-Ra St. Brown, clearly a top 5 wide receiver in Dynasty. Amari Cooper, after the first 2 years of his career, he was a top 5 wide receiver in Dynasty. Allen Robinson, after the first 2 years of his career, he was a top 5 wide receiver in Dynasty. AJ Green, I wasn't playing Dynasty in 2013. I didn't play Dynasty until 2014, but I'd imagine in 2013, he was a top 5 wide receiver in Dynasty. Dwayne Bowe, I wasn't playing back in 2009, and Andre Johnson, a Hall of Fame level wide receiver. Elite company with the worst quarterback play in the NFL. We're going into this next season where I'm not a massive Aaron Rodgers guy, but we can say Aaron Rodgers will be much better than the worst quarterback play in the NFL last year. And where's Garrett Wilson currently priced? In the flockfantasy.com community rankings, which are completely free for any of y'all that want to go out there and check them out. You can find the link in the description comment section. Garrett Wilson right now is wide receiver 8. He is right behind Drake London, who has never come close to this kind of production, and right ahead of Brandon Ayuk and Jalen Waddle. Now, if you look at the expert rankings, Garrett Wilson's higher than this. The expert rankings, Garrett Wilson is ahead of Drake London. But we're talking about buy low candidates. We're talking about how y'all are valuing these players, not how I am, the guys at Fantasy Stock Exchange, Dynasty Land Football, Dynasty Domain, the whole 9 yards. And what's also interesting is if we go over to Underdog, where there are like already millions of dollars of drafts underway, Garrett Wilson is currently the wide receiver 8 in those drafts. Garrett Wilson is going at the same point in redraft leagues right now than he is going in Dynasty. And he was 23 years old this past season. He's going to turn 24 this year. So you can buy a 23-year-old wide receiver at his redraft price in Dynasty Fantasy Football and have that extended runway. Now, of course, the issue maybe for the long term is, well, Mason, you have an older quarterback coming off a torn Achilles. Maybe he's good this year, but we don't necessarily know what to expect in 2025, 2026. And I would say that sounds a lot like Drake London's situation to me as well. So why are we knocking Garrett Wilson for it? I don't know what else I can say. I mean, if you have London, I'm pivoting to Garrett Wilson in a heartbeat. If I had Christian McCaffrey, I'm pivoting to Garrett Wilson in a heartbeat. If I had Brandon Ayuk, I am pivoting to Garrett Wilson so easily. I would even add like a second rounder to get that done as well. I think Garrett Wilson is a phenomenal price at this range. Now, let's pull up what we have with Chris Olave. Now, Chris Olave, obviously another wide receiver that was in that same Ohio State room. And I know we wrote an article about this, diving in deep on flogfantasy.com. I want to say at the beginning of the offseason. So I am sorry if you are getting a double dose of this, but of course, if you didn't read that article on flogfantasy.com, I don't know why. You should be a member of the Flog. We actually just launched a new tool where you can upload your own league to flogfantasy.com. You can view exactly how I value all the players in your league, what team I think has the most value, second most value, third most value, all the way down the line. You can view that with the expert rankings of really any of the creators that we have over there on the site. Plus, obviously, our Dynasty Trade Calculator, our Dynasty Trade Finder, all the draft guides, and all the premium content from all your favorite creators. And yeah, code FLOCK on flogfantasy.com will get you 30% off any sub. Plus, yours truly will break down your Dynasty team in a podcast. You can find that link in the description and comment section. But going over looking at Chris Olave. Chris Olave, year one, comes in, borderline top 10 NFL draft pick, 4.8 receptions per game, 7.6 targets per game, 70 receiving yards per game, 13.1 fantasy points per game. So was he a league winner? Was he Puka Nacua? No, he was not. But he was extremely, and I mean extremely impressive for a rookie wide receiver. Now, did this lead for him to get overdrafted in year two? Yes. Chris Olave was overdrafted in year two in redraft leagues, and I was not smart enough to avoid him. I wish I was, but sadly, I wasn't. I drafted him, and I'm going to draft him again this year. In year two, if we add in what we just had, Chris Olave comps to Garrett Wilson, T. Higgins, Terry McLaurin, Amari Cooper, Sammy Watkins, Keenan Allen, AJ Green, Dwayne Bowe, as well as Andre Johnson. So you have a few mediocre wide receivers here. Pretty much worst case scenario that you'd be looking at, which for the price you're paying with Chris Olave would be very bad. I don't want to downplay it. Is if he turns out to be Terry McLaurin, if he turns out to be always just like a high-end wide receiver 3 in fantasy that has name value, then that is a massive, that's a massive L, and maybe that's why people are worried and are very scared about Olave. But you still have these elite Hall of Fame level talents at the wide receiver position in your range of outcomes here. If we go over and look at where he's going in redraft leagues, Chris Olave currently is going right after DJ Moore, Stephon Diggs, Deebo Samuel, right before Mike Evans, Tank Dell, Malik Neighbors, and Chris Olave is wide receiver 17 in those redraft leagues currently. If you head over to flockfantasy.com, Chris Olave is right now at wide receiver 12. He's going right after Nico Collins. He's going right before DJ Moore. I mean, what's interesting here is if you look at this, the Olave DJ Moore ADP in redraft is about the same, but you're getting a multiple year discount with Olave where you have that extended runway. So, I mean, if we're looking at this, what I would be worried about when it comes to Chris Olave, he doesn't necessarily have the path for great quarterback play coming in, or I don't want to say great QB play because I don't think Aaron Rodgers is going to be some Hall of Fame level player this next season, but he doesn't have a clear path to a quarterback upgrade, right? Where we can clearly look at what we just had with the Jets over the past 2 years. And we can say, even if Rodgers isn't prime Rodgers, it will still be a situation where it's much better than anything Zach Wilson gave or anything any of those quarterbacks gave over the past 2 seasons. New Orleans, not the case. New Orleans, it will be frustrating that you still have Derek Carr there for one more season. We have a large enough sample now with Derek Carr where you can confidently say this isn't someone that's anything special, just a mediocre quarterback. This past year, obviously, we just simply would not push the ball down the field. Averaged 228 passing yards per game this past season, 234 the year prior. He's had 7.3 adjusted yards per pass attempt this past year. But I mean, the main thing obviously was just this is someone that was just dumping off nonstop to Alvin Kamara and refused to throw the ball deep. And if you look at the Derek Carr contract, I mean, I would love if somehow the Saints had a different quarterback this next season for Olave, but I mean, not really an option. Derek Carr this year has $62 million on the dead cap. And what's kind of gross is Derek Carr next season has $50 million in the dead cap as well. So if you're looking at Olave versus Garrett Wilson, I understand the statement to sell Chris Olave more than I do Wilson, because I mean, if you're looking at Wilson with historical data, I mean, really all of those guys that he comps to at one point or another were borderline top 5 options in Dynasty. Whereas in the case of Olave, you have some of his historical comps not being those top 5 options. You have someone like T. Higgins thrown in, which, like I said, you don't want to invest into Chris Olave as a low-end wide receiver 1 in Dynasty, and he turns out to be a high-end wide receiver 3 forever. That would be very bad. And on top of it, if you're looking at the quarterback play, we can assume that Wilson gets a bump, whereas Olave is probably going to remain neutral, at least over this next season. So I understand where people are coming from in saying that they are uninterested in Olave, but I felt like we needed to go through and make this video just to reset the expectations and say out loud, while yes, these players were disappointing last year, particularly in redraft formats, they are still proven talents based on what they've done through the first 2 years of their NFL career. If Malik Neighbors, if Rome, if any of these rookies come out and post the rookie season that either Garrett Wilson or Chris Olave did, everybody will be so excited. I'm telling you right now, Malik Neighbors goes out there and has a Garrett Wilson's year 1, people are going to be pumped. I'm not saying to go out there and trade Malik Neighbors for Garrett Wilson, but I don't know. I don't think it's as easy to just say these guys disappointed last year, so they're going to be clear sells. I'm not doing it. But I think that's all I have for you with this video. Hope that we are able to shine some light and hopefully help you out just a bit. And of course, if you have not done so already, hit that like, subscribe if you play Dynasty. And of course, if you want to check out any of the tools that we have on the site, if you want to check out any of the premium content from all your favorite creators, find out all on flockfantasy.com. Code FLOCK. Get hooked up with 30% off any sub. Plus, yours truly will break down your Dynasty team in a podcast. But that's all I got for you. Appreciate you. And hope we get to see you out with the video tomorrow.